Chapter 28, Section 1. World War II is now over. You've got Europe and Japan laying in absolute shambles. You now have to rebuild governments, economies, cities. The world's got some work ahead of them here. Let's start by talking about Germany. In July of 45, you're going to have the Potsdam Conference. At the Potsdam Conference, Truman, Stalin, and Churchill are going to get together and talk about now what. The war's over in Europe. Partway through this conference, though, Churchill is going to be replaced by Clement Attlee, as Churchill will no longer be the prime minister in Britain. And one of the things they're going to decide at this conference is they're going to talk about the division of Germany. Germany's going to be divided into 4 occupation zones. The western, more industrialized part of Germany is going to be split between the British, the French, and the US. And since the Soviets are on the eastern side of Germany, the eastern side of Germany is the poorer rural part. The Soviets will get that side. Then comes the question about the capital. If you look on the map there, Berlin is entirely within the Soviet side. And so they're not going to let Soviets have the entire capital. So Berlin is going to be split as well between those 4 powers. At the Potsdam Conference, all the powers pledge to crush what was left of the Nazi Party, to rebuild the local governments of Germany, to rebuild German industry, and to help the refugees that have escaped Germany return home if they wish. But for all of this to happen, you're going to have cooperation between these 4 powers. Problem is, there's going to be a huge amount of tension between the Soviets and the other allies. Because if you remember, and Churchill had warned about this, the Soviet Union had expanded throughout Eastern Europe, which they had to move across Eastern Europe to defeat the Nazis and remove them from Eastern Europe. But the Soviets hadn't given any of this land back. They're keeping it, their influence there. And the other thing causing tension was the Soviet Union was demanding reparations. This caused a lot of tension because reparations, that helped create the mess after World War I with reparations. And the other countries have kind of decided, you know what, we can't go down that same road again. But the Soviet Union, who suffered tremendous losses in World War II, they wanted Germany to pay. Let's take a look at what was going on in Japan. There's some huge issues to deal with in Japan. One is the fact that their economy was absolutely awful. World War II just completely ruined it. And the other unique issue Japan's going to have is they had 2 cities that had been devastated by the atomic bomb. Now in Japan, it's going to be a little bit different. You aren't going to take Japan and divide it up amongst multiple powers because the primary country that beat Japan was us. And so we occupied Japan ourselves until 1952. And some of the tasks we're going to have before us in Japan, we had to help end the militarism there. We had to help rebuild their economy. And we were going to help them build a democratic government where the people of Japan would get to vote on their government leaders and such. If you remember, one of the conditions that was allowed Japan, the one condition that was allowed Japan at the end of World War II, was they could keep Emperor Hirohito on the throne. But part of the agreement was he would have no power. He was there simply as a figurehead. The person that's going to run Japan is going to be General Douglas MacArthur. And you're going to have a new Congress set up to help MacArthur run Japan. And one of the big things they had to do right away was demobilize several million troops that the Japanese had for World War II. Japan's going to get a new constitution in 1947. And in this new constitution, you're going to see things like a democratic system set up. Women will have suffrage. You'll see freedom of the religion. We do abolish their army and navy because we did not want to see them being a military power again. But as you look at those first three there, democracy, women's suffrage, freedom of religion, highly influenced by American principles. But the thing is, the Japanese people, they like this too. There's nothing they're not to like. You know, everybody gets a say in the government, even women, and you could be whatever religion you want. I mean, there was nothing there that they really would have been that upset about. You're going to see economic changes happening as well. Land was going to be given to farmers. Unions would be allowed for one of the first times there. The zaibatsu are broken up. Before the war, you had the zaibatsu, which were these huge corporations that controlled tons of stuff, but they were run by just these single families. All of these changes in Japan are going to allow Japan to have tremendous economic growth after World War II. Let's talk about punishment. The Allied leaders want the Axis leaders punished. And let's start by talking about the German war crimes trial. The German war crimes trial are going to be called the Nuremberg trials. And they're going to begin in November of 1945. And it's going to be before an international military court. And what these Nazis are going to be put on trial for, they're going to be put on trial for planning the war, committing war crimes, other crimes against humanity, and conspiring to commit the crimes. The results of the German war crimes trial, of the Nuremberg trials, 3 will be acquitted, 7 will receive jail time, and 12 will be sentenced to death. There are other trials that are going to take place throughout Germany on smaller levels, and those smaller level Nazis were either jailed or fined or barred from ever holding public office. You did have some Nazis that escaped to Latin America. Probably the most famous that's going to escape to Latin America was Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann hid his identity and escaped. This guy was one of the chief planners of the Holocaust, and he disappeared after the war. Ended up in Argentina. It's an interesting story surrounding his capture, but the new nation of Israel actually had agents that went to Argentina. Argentina does not turn over criminals to other countries, and so they went and they basically kind of snatched him out of Argentina in the middle of the night, brought him back and put him on trial. Japanese war crimes, or the war trials, going to be May 1946 to November of 1948. It's going to be the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, set up by MacArthur, because MacArthur is the one calling the shots in Japan. And at these Japanese war crimes trial, more than 20 from the Japanese military are going to be prosecuted. 7 are sentenced to death, including the Japanese Prime Minister during the war, um, Hideki Tojo. He was the Japanese premier during the war. You have others that get life in prison. And one of the debates you're going to have in the years following World War II is you had a lot of Allied people, they wanted more officials punished. They wanted more Japanese officials punished. They wanted more Nazi officials punished. But the bottom line is the judges followed the rules here. They followed the rules. If you just punish out of anger, that's what helped lead to World War II in the first place. You know, Germany at the end of World War II, people were angry and they put all sorts of punishments on Germany. It made Germany bitter. These trials are going to set the standards of war conduct for your actions during war. You are held accountable for your actions during the war, any war, including today. A lot of people think there's no rules in war. There are rules in war. You know, and you can't just use the excuse that Eichmann tried to use. I was just following orders, he said. If the orders are immoral or illegal, it is your obligation not to follow them.